Daisy, the plan is to load airplanes with sterilized screwworms, fly them over Mexico, and keep the New World screwworm from crossing the border.
Imagine a mission so strange that it sounds fake, but real. Every single week, over 14 million sterile flies are dropped out of planes into the thick jungles of Panama. Why? This is a secret war against a flesh-eating worm that could wipe out millions of livestock and cost billions, while quietly threatening humans too. So why is the United States dumping these flies, week after week, in a place most people couldn't point out on a map? And why now? What are these 14.7 million worms, and who are they fighting? The flesh-eating parasite. Alright, so here's the first twist. These 14.7 million worms that the United States is dumping into Panama every week aren't worms at all. They're sterile male screwworm flies dropped from planes like a weekly sci-fi delivery, and they are deployed as part of a decades-old mission to fight an enemy that literally eats living flesh. Yeah, let that settle for a moment. These flies are sent out to stop the New World screwworm, also known by its supervillain-sounding Latin name, Cochleomyia hominivorax. It sounds fancy, but what these creatures do is anything but. The screwworm's larvae burrow into the flesh of living animals, feeding on raw tissue while the host is still alive. They crawl deeper, creating painful, festering wounds that attract more female screwworms, which lay more eggs, leading to an escalating cycle of infestation. This process is called myiasis, and it can turn a small wound on a cow or a sheep, or even a human, into a site of horrifying pain and, if untreated, death. Imagine a cow grazing in the warm breeze, flicking its tail, and a tiny fly lands unnoticed on a scratch. Days later, that small scratch becomes a gaping, oozing wound filled with larvae eating it alive from the inside out. The already weak cattle become unable to eat, start producing less milk, lose weight rapidly, and many die if the infestation isn't detected quickly. And while most cases are in livestock, there have been humans who suffered, often in the quiet corners of Central and South America, from painful screwworm infestations that required surgery to remove the larvae from their bodies. And this is not a small problem. Before the 1960s, screwworm infestations cost the United States livestock industry hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Ranchers would find cattle dead, sometimes after days of suffering, and watch profits bleed away alongside the health of their herds. The panic was real enough that in 1957, the United States government launched what would become one of the most successful eradication programs in history, using a strange but ingenious method called the sterile insect technique. Here's how it works. Scientists rear millions of male screwworm flies in labs, then expose them to a precise dose of radiation that leaves them sterile but otherwise healthy and ready to mate. The millions then release these sterile males into the environment, where they find and mate with wild female screwworm flies. Because the males are sterile, the eggs these females lay never hatch, breaking the parasite's life cycle in the wild. Over time, the screwworm population collapses, not with chemicals or massive extermination campaigns, but by flooding the area with flies that simply can't reproduce. And it worked. By 1966, screwworm was officially eradicated in the United States, and the program kept pushing south, eventually driving the parasite out of Mexico and much of Central America. But here's the catch. The screwworm remains endemic in South America, just waiting for a chance to crawl north again, crossing into Mexico and back into the United States if the biological barrier breaks. This is why the Panama-Colombia border became the critical front line, the last checkpoint, the thin biological wall standing between the United States and a parasite that could cost billions and devastate entire herds of cattle if it ever returns. And so, every week, planes fly over the dense Panamanian jungles, releasing millions of sterile male screwworm flies to patrol that invisible line. mating with any wild females that might drift north. This invisible battle is ongoing every single week because it has to be. A single fertile female fly can lay up to 400 eggs at a time, and the larvae can infest any warm-blooded animal, from cattle to wildlife to humans, with devastating speed. It's strange, right? The idea that dumping millions of sterile flies from planes is the best line of defense against a parasite that feeds on living flesh. But it is. This is how science fights an enemy you can't see, one that doesn't care about borders, politics, or treaties. This is how you keep an entire industry safe without spraying chemicals or launching a massive culling operation. But it does leave us with a question. How exactly does releasing millions of sterile flies stop a parasite that burrows into living flesh? And why has this method remained so effective, even after nearly 70 years of use? The Panama biological border. At the heart of this story is the Darien Gap, that wild patch of rainforest between Panama and Colombia that even highways avoid. If you look at a map, it's the only place where the Pan-American Highway breaks, a stretch of dense swamps, jungles, and rivers so rough that it has stopped cars and entire migration routes for decades. But this unforgiving terrain is exactly what makes it the perfect choke point for the war against the screwworm. You see, the program's biggest innovation is turning this natural bottleneck into a biological barrier where flies are not pests, but protectors, patrolling an invisible front line that could collapse if even a single fertile screwworm female sneaks through. In the 1990s, after the screwworm had been driven out of Mexico and Central America, the risk of reinvasion from the south remained. So the United States partnered with Panama to create COPEG, the Panama United States Commission for the Eradication and Prevention of Screwworm. This binational team became the watchkeepers of this fly fortress, building a sterile fly production facility in Pecora, Panama, with a single mission: keep screwworm from moving north, no matter what. This facility is not small-time lab work. It produces up to 100 million sterile flies every single week, maintaining a continuous flood of sterile male screwworm flies across the Darien Gap to intercept any fertile females attempting to migrate north. These flies are reared in tightly controlled conditions, fed and irradiated to sterilize them without harming their ability to mate. They are then packed into canisters and loaded onto planes that fly precise release routes across the border regions. From above, they look like nothing, tiny specks falling through the canopy, but on the ground, they are a constant living barrier that quietly keeps North America screwworm-free. The strategy is simple in theory, but genius in execution. By flooding the environment with sterile males, they outcompete wild, fertile males for the attention of females. The females mate and lay eggs, but the eggs never hatch, collapsing the parasite's population without chemicals or mass culling. The operation is a rare example of biological control that works, saving ranchers billions in potential losses while avoiding environmental damage. But here's where things get intense. While the program was stable for years, with occasional isolated cases quickly contained, something shifted recently. In 2022, there were only 25 reported cases in the region, but by 2023, the numbers exploded, with over 6,500 cases reported, stretching the program's capacity to the limit and forcing urgent expansions in fly production and aerial release efforts. What caused this spike? Part of it is increased animal movements, as trade and migration pressure the Darien Gap with more livestock and wildlife crossings. Climate shifts may also create more suitable conditions for screwworm survival and spread, adding to the complexity of containment. The surge in cases was a wake-up call, reminding both Panama and the United States that this battle isn't over, and that the screwworm is always looking for a way back in. So, how do they respond to a sudden surge like this? The COPEG facility ramped up production, shifting from its normal 70 million sterile flies weekly to its maximum of 100 million, increasing aerial release flights to ensure that the sterile males still outnumber fertile males in the wild. Teams on the ground doubled their monitoring of livestock and wildlife, checking for infestations so that any hotspots could be treated quickly before spreading. It's a high-stakes, high-coordination effort that requires cooperation between pilots, scientists, Panamanian officials, and American veterinary experts, all to keep the invisible wall intact. The cost of this program is not small, but the cost of failure would be catastrophic. If screwworms were to re-establish in North America, the economic impact could run into billions, devastating ranchers and requiring massive government intervention to contain outbreaks. By comparison, maintaining this fly fortress in Panama is a small price to pay to prevent an economic and animal welfare disaster. And here's something to think about as you head to your fridge for a late-night snack. The next time you enjoy a glass of milk or a steak, there's a good chance it's affordable, partly because of a quiet war being fought with flies over a jungle thousands of miles away. But it also leaves us with a question that lingers in the air like the hum of those flies. If this biological barrier in Panama holds, can the United States remain screwworm-free forever? Or is the enemy evolving, finding cracks in the system and testing the limits of a program that has held for nearly 70 years? Because as cases surge and climate changes, the screwworm's pressure against the border only grows. What happens if the flies can no longer keep up? And what would it look like if this invisible wall were to break, letting a flesh-eating parasite back into the continent it was once eradicated from? The new screwworm, crisis, and the US response. For decades, the United States, Panama, and Mexico have managed to hold back an enemy so tiny it can disappear inside a scratch on a cow's hide, only to come roaring back stronger the moment people get comfortable. Right now, that's exactly what's happening. The screwworm is not just testing the biological border built with flies, it's pushing hard against it, forcing America to scramble, spend big, and defend billions at stake. In the past 20 years, there have been the most intense screwworm outbreaks in Panama, and it didn't stop there. By 2023, the outbreaks surged north, rolling through Central America with over 6,500 reported cases, compared to just 25 cases the year before. Livestock were found with painful, gaping wounds, wildlife was dying quietly in forests, and small farmers watched entire herds at risk of infestation. The clock was ticking, because if the screwworm broke through Panama's invisible barrier, it wouldn't stop at the border. And by early 2024, it happened. Reports came in of screwworm detections in southern Mexico. The parasite was on the move, heading north, creeping closer to the United States border, and forcing the USDA to take drastic action. Imports of certain livestock were suspended. Inspection teams were deployed across key checkpoints, scanning for signs of infection. It was a scramble, but one rooted in clear, pressing logic. If screwworm enters the United States again, it could cost the livestock industry billions of dollars, just like it did in the 1950s, before eradication. This is why the United States is not just maintaining the sterile fly releases in Panama, it's escalating them. In January 2025, the USDA announced an $8.5 million investment in a brand new sterile fly production facility in South Texas, designed to bolster emergency response capacity if screwworm breaches the border. And in Mexico, the USDA and local partners committed $21 million to remodel and expand existing sterile fly facilities, aiming to double production capacity to between 60 and 100 million sterile flies weekly. These expansions are not theoretical gestures. They are part of a real, living defense network that now stretches from the jungles of Panama, through the rainforests of Central America, across the hills of southern Mexico, and up to the cattle ranches of Texas and beyond. It's a system built on coordination, timing, and constant vigilance, because the screwworm doesn't rest. In June 2025, Secretary Rollins stood at a press conference, laying out a 5-pronged USDA plan to combat this threat. It includes enhanced surveillance, ramped-up quarantine enforcement, advanced sterile insect releases, public-private partnerships with ranchers, and ongoing scientific research to stay ahead of any evolving parasite resistance. This isn't just about dropping flies anymore. It's a sophisticated system involving drones, genetic screening, on-the-ground veterinarians, and rapid response teams working in sync to catch outbreaks early and contain them before they spread. But here's what's wild. All of this investment, all of this planning, comes down to a strategy that still relies on those sterile flies. Every week, planes take off from Panama and now increasingly from Mexico, releasing millions of sterile male screwworm flies over targeted areas, creating a living, breathing barrier. The flies mate with wild females, but the eggs never hatch, collapsing the next generation quietly, without chemicals, in a way that is both efficient and environmentally friendly. This program is expensive, but it saves money in the long run. By preventing screwworm from re-entering the United States, the sterile fly program protects an industry worth billions and spares ranchers from economic and emotional devastation. A single outbreak could require quarantines, mass livestock inspections, and painful culling if cases spiral out of control, costing far more than the cost of releasing flies and maintaining vigilance. And while it sounds straightforward, flies fighting flies to protect cows and people, the logistics are complex. Teams must monitor weather, track wildlife movements, coordinate international efforts, and maintain exacting production standards for the flies. Timing is critical. Release flies too early or too late, and wild males gain the upper hand. Fail to cover an area, and a few fertile females could restart an entire infestation chain. It raises a real question. Is this biological border strong enough, or are breaches inevitable? The 2023 and 2024 outbreaks are stark reminders that the screwworm is always looking for cracks in the system, and climate change, increasing animal trade, and human migration can create vulnerabilities. These factors can shift wildlife movement patterns, expand suitable habitats for the parasite, and increase opportunities for the screwworm to slip past the invisible flywall we've built. But if one thing stands out, it's human ingenuity and adaptability. The same innovative thinking that turned sterile flies into a defensive weapon in the 1950s is still driving the battle today, scaled up with modern science and data-driven logistics to match the evolving threat. And it's working, but only if the system keeps adapting, expanding, and improving. As you sit here, maybe late at night, absorbing this story, consider how many systems like this operate invisibly in the background, protecting everyday life from disasters you rarely hear about. The screwworm war is a perfect example of the hidden battles fought by scientists, veterinarians, pilots, and policymakers to keep your milk affordable, your food supply stable, and your environment safe. The unsung heroes. It's easy to think this fight against the screwworm is just about flies, but every sterile fly drifting down over the Panamanian jungle represents a web of human persistence that stretches back generations. Behind every weekly aerial drop are scientists, pilots, lab technicians, Peace Corps volunteers, and local inspectors who have built a high-tech natural border using biology itself as a shield. Take the sterile fly production facilities in Panama and Texas, for instance. These aren't simple insect farms. Every week, over 100 million flies are bred, fed, carefully monitored, and then sterilized using irradiation in a process so precise that a miscalibration could jeopardize an entire operation. Workers in these labs measure humidity, feed the larvae, monitor temperatures, and ensure the flies remain vigorous enough to survive release, while ensuring they will never produce offspring that can spread the parasite. Then there are the pilots who fly the exact routes needed to disperse these flies evenly across remote regions of the Darien Gap, timing releases with weather windows to make sure the flies land where they are needed most. It's not glamorous work, but it's critical, as these flies become a living, breathing shield that holds back a parasite capable of inflicting unimaginable suffering on animals and economic ruin for entire regions. Peace Corps volunteers and local outreach workers travel to remote farms, educating communities about the warning signs of screwworm infestations and how to report them early. They visit ranchers, check wounds on cattle, and help implement early interventions, ensuring outbreaks are contained before they become unstoppable. Inspectors work with USDA's APHIS, coordinating surveillance that includes monitoring wildlife, setting traps, and analyzing samples to track the parasite's movement like detectives following a silent criminal through the jungle. This quiet army of people maintains a biological quarantine, one that is as real and vital as any concrete wall, requiring unrelenting dedication to keep functioning. It's a system built on constant vigilance, using science, coordination, and local knowledge to maintain an invisible front line against a tiny enemy that never truly goes away. All of this work is fueled by a shared belief in protecting something bigger than individual farms. It's about safeguarding food security, ensuring that families across North America can access affordable milk and meat, and preventing the slow spread of a parasite that can inflict agony on wildlife, pets, and even people. This entire operation is not just about science in a lab. It is about people in the field, boots in the mud, eyes scanning wounds on cattle, and hands releasing flies that will never have offspring, blocking the parasite's advance. It's the pilots charting precise drop zones, the lab teams who check each batch for quality, and the local workers who walk miles to remote farms to teach ranchers what to watch for. This is a living shield that only works because people keep it working. What you're seeing with these sterile flies dropping each week is not a quirky science story. It is a relentless, ongoing fight to hold back an ancient parasite that has the power to destroy herds, wreck family incomes, and break food systems if it ever gets loose. It is a quiet war, fought with precision, patience, and the will to keep it from crossing a line that, if it does, would change everything. Millions of sterile flies out there are fighting a parasite that would otherwise devastate animals and families each week. It's nature against itself, powered by human vigilance. Let me know in the comments what you think about this hidden war.